Hello, everyone. This is the Psychology of Human Sexuality, and we're talking about love and communication. And we ended part one by beginning to talk about flirtation. And so let me recap just a bit of that. We said that flirtation is common in one way or another among virtually all animals. Some of that is based on pheromones or odors. In some species, it is related to the visual and olfactory response to estrous cycles. In some species, flirtation is about the way in which an animal behaves in a dance like fashion around a potential mate. In other species, some birds construct elaborate nests to show that they are good providers. And of course, most of the flirtation in the ornate ways is done by males towards females. In humans, we said last time that some flirtation is instinctual, while even the instinctual kinds of flirtatious behavior is enhanced intentionally by both males and females. Now, something to keep in mind is that men, on average, are consistently misinterpreting any female attention as flirtation. Okay? And of course, that's related to reproductive opportunities. And so now we're back to the issue of evolution, aren't we? So men have a mission from an evolutionary standpoint to spread their genes to as many possible offspring as possible. So they wouldn't want to miss a reproductive opportunity by not seeing a flirtatious female. In behaviors that are enhanced intentionally by humans towards the opposite sex or the same sex, we can imagine that flirtation has a number of additional purposes than just the possibility of procreation. One of them is to obtain favor or favors. One reason could be to obtain something of value. Another could be simply to bolster one's self-esteem, to find one attractive to others. So humans go the extra bit, don't they? Now, males have a number of things that they do that are pretty unconscious. Okay? One is that they put their chests out to show that they have more muscles than they actually do, because this is something that harkens back to early man when big muscles were a sign of a good mate. Hands on hips, waist grip, shoulder shrug, head tilt, eyebrow flash. It looks a little like this. And if you really get it going, just a little one would be like that. Entering personal space. This one is often augmented intentionally by males. Another is defining the crotch area as a way to bring attention to genitals by pointing with thumbs or fingers. If you could have fingers hanging out of a belt or pockets, or pointing at the upper thigh area. Having a swagger, something I don't really have, but moving in a way that suggests coolness and confidence. Confidence is almost always listed in the top 3 or 4 things that attract a partner. And then attention to symmetry, which is often straightening a tie or getting the cuffs of each arm at the same length, or picking lint, which could also be a sign of boredom for that matter. Females do different things, and females are more likely to augment what they do intentionally and artificially. They also put their chests out, but it's to draw attention to their breasts so that they are really communicating that they can feed offspring. They will sometimes roll their hip or sway back and forth to bring attention to the hips, to show that they have hips that can pass a child. through. Hand on hip, palm flat, up against the hip, like this. Okay, so instead of grabbing the hip like this, they palm on the hip, again drawing attention to the hip. A hair toss or display. Even women with short hair will do this. Lifting eyebrows, much as men do. Eyes wide open, lower eyelids. So maybe like something like this. It's usually slower with females, eyes wide open. And then a casual glance across. A furtive glance, lowering eyelids. Yeah. Head tilt. Looking away. Yeah. Attention to symmetry. That has a lot to do with what's done with makeup. Getting the left and right side of the face is a daunting task. Symmetry is something that, as you have heard already, increases the unconscious perception that a person has slightly superior genetics. Object caress, so a female may hold an object, here are my glasses, and be very nurturing with the object, or a glass, to show that, yes, I'm a good caretaker, I'm very gentle, and I can take care of you in the same way. Self-caress, so touching a shoulder or touching a thigh or something. Skin exposure and lips pouting, so, or licking lips. Okay, and most of these are although they have their roots perhaps in biology and genetics, as to calling attention to the possibilities of child rearing and caretaking. These are ones that are also heavily augmented by females who intentionally are flirting. Okay. So now let's talk about levels of relationships. And what I'll describe to you are 5 levels of relationships, from the lowest to the highest amount of intensity, intimacy. And intimacy, you may know, is referring to the depth of emotional connection that you have with someone that is brought forth by self-disclosure and a number of other things. So the first level is a non-relationship. You don't have a relationship with the overwhelming majority of the population, 99.99999%. And so the only ingredient there that's appropriate would be superficial communication, non-emotional communication, no self-revealing of any depth. So something like, hey, it's warm outside, isn't it? Next level up would be an acquaintanceship or an acquaintance, either one. Still, just superficial communication, nothing of any depth. And an acquaintance is just someone who you might know their name, might not. Okay? You've seen them around. The next level up is a bit different. That's a companionship. A companionship is someone with whom you share an activity or activities. It is actually what dating used to be, because dating used to be slower than it is now in terms of the build-up to sexual activity. Of course, we go through cycles, don't we? But compared to 40s and 50s, that's a true statement. So this is someone that maybe you play pickup basketball with. This may be somebody you watch a football game with on television. I'm revealing my male interests. But it could also be someone that you go to a movie with, like on a date. Yeah? So you're sharing the activity of the movie. You're sharing the activity of the football game. Now, the ingredients for this one are essentially just superficial communication and the beginnings of self-disclosure at low levels if you continue to spend time with someone. Okay? Next level up, friendship. Very different. Friendship includes, yes, lots of superficial communication, but the beginnings of deeper kinds of self-disclosure, the beginnings potentially of trust, and the beginnings of a commitment to that relationship, a friendship. The highest level, the fifth level of intensity, of intimacy, is a romance. Now, a romance is mostly superficial communication, but it is much more about deep levels of self-disclosure, trust that builds over time, commitment that builds on top of trust. You wouldn't want to commit to someone you can't trust. That would be dangerous. Or that you don't know you can trust. That would be risky as heck. And then finally, sex, built on commitment, trust, self-disclosure, and lots and lots of superficial communication as well. You see, there's a logic here if you take a close look at this. So we're talking about developing relationships carefully, superficial communication to self-disclosure, which is the engine of intimacy, to trust, to commitment, and finally to sexual activity. Now that's ideal. If you wanted to spend your life with one person and you wanted it to be the right person for you, you would take steps like that. But that's not what most people do. Most people go from superficial communication to sex, and then they try to back build the commitment, the trust, and the self-disclosure. The problem with that is, and I'm calling it a problem, is that it's harder to do that if you've already been sexual with someone. Sex brings forth emotions and attachment that is easily mistaken for greater levels of connection at an intimate level than it really is. Because you can have sex with someone that you don't have any commitment to, no trust of, in fact, distrust of, and no real self-revelation, no self-disclosure. You see? All right. So when we talk about these levels, we're really building a building. We're building a structure, aren't we? And that structure means that sex is at the top of a pyramid, in a sense, a four-sided building. And so if sex left the equation, left the relationship for a while, which might happen if someone was in an accident, very, very sick, or had to travel for a job to another state, or got deployed, or there's a number of things that could happen that reduce the sex part of the relationship. If the other layers are present in good shape, commitment, trust, and self-disclosure, the loss of sex, at least for some time, if not a long, long time, that relationship will still hang together. You see? That's why relationships built on sex, and only sex, can't last the distance. They can't. Not as a deep relationship. Okay. Now I have some information on the styles of love, which are very self-explanatory, and they come from Greek words and mythology. And so they are eros, ludus, storge, pragma, mania, and agape. Eros is passionate love, ludus is game-playing love, storge is friendship love, pragma is logical love, mania is dependent love, and agape is selfless love. I describe each one of these by the way in which it is characterized in general and what people say who are in relationships like that. Okay? And I also relate it to movies that many people would know. So, for example, eros love is a highly passionate, sexually intense love that really doesn't have any of the other parts. It's one of the ones that we just talked about, where it's one where you don't have the self-disclosure, the commitment and trust. You don't have that. Okay, so eros love is depicted in the movie Titanic. You've probably seen that movie, but it's in other films as well. Romeo and Juliet, Ghost, Sweet Home Alabama, Natural Born Killers, Princess Bride, Sleepless in Seattle, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella. Okay? So what you might be interested in is to follow each one of these, which are not worth me spending the time on these videos to describe. You can go through them on your PowerPoint. If you are not in this class and you wish to look these up, it's very easy to do. Just look up each one of those. So ludus love and so forth. Yeah. Okay. And then the last activity I have is for you to go through a series of questions. They're actually statements. They'll appear to you as if they were questions. The first one is, my love and I have the perfect physical chemistry between us. Okay? And what you're going to do is just write a true or false next to each one of those statements. Okay? And there are lots of them. Okay? There are 24 of them. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look for anywhere in which there are consecutive 4 truths. And each one of those sections of those questions refers to a style of love. So questions 1 through 4 are related to eros, 5 to 8 ludus, and so on. And I have a slide on calculating your results. So you're going to look for truths between each of those segments that are more than 2. 4, you're looking first for 4. And so any of those that have 4, there may be more than 1. Sometimes there are 2, rarely 3, often 1. You will see that it will correspond to the way you tend to see what love is. It is likely your style of going about relationships. And it works out pretty well. Yeah? Now, the next portion of the PowerPoint concerns the predictors of having a happy relationship for any sexual orientation. Okay? And I'm going to go over a few of these, and you can go through all of them if you wish. I suspect you do. So here are a few of the more important ones. The relationship began after age 25. You did not live together and did not have children within the first year or 2. Those are all predictors of a happier relationship. You both grew up in stable, non-abusive 2-parent homes. You both have roughly equal levels of commitment to the relationship and to each other. And you are both roughly the same level of good communication between you, or at least you're willing to work on it. Okay? Similar backgrounds, education, those sorts of things. Similar values. That's a big one. Okay? Now, let's talk about the creation of relationships and what that looks like. So, when you create a relationship, you are actually forming a new entity that I'll just randomly call an us. You're forming an us. It's the combination of the two of you. You and me and us. But now that you've created a new entity, you have to acknowledge that you have responsibilities to that us. You see? Now that us is something that requires that if the relationship needs something separate from what you want individually or need individually, that you do whatever it is the relationship requires in order to continue the relationship in good form. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say you're finding yourself bickering more than you used to and you don't know why. And you realize that it would be really helpful if you went to talk to a therapist who works with couples. An expert, basically, in evaluating such things and offering you ways to move past them, you see? But neither of you or one of you don't really want to go. It might be too expensive, it takes time, I don't want to reveal myself to other people that I don't know, etc., etc. Well, now that you've created an us, that's too bad. And we used to say in New York, tublets. Too bad, baby. You got to do it anyway. If you have a commitment to the relationship and its continuance, in its best form, it doesn't matter whether you want to go to a therapist or not. You go. And you give it your best effort to discover what the issues are and to find out what would help and to do those things, you see? All right. That's just one example. Now, when we are starting to form a relationship with someone that we are attracted to, we have what I call a neurochemical storm going on in our brain. Lots of different chemicals begin to be secreted, and they create a very powerful addiction, a very powerful craving, not unlike illicit drugs that induce euphoria, okay? Like methamphetamine induces a euphoria, and so do many others. But one of those chemicals is adrenaline. This is the chemical you get when you're under stress, actually, and it's the one that creates a sweat or a heart race or your mouth going dry, maybe weak in the knees, that kind of thing. Yeah. The next one is really the ecstasy one, and that's dopamine. I didn't mean the drug ecstasy. Dopamine. That's the reward chemical. This gives you a very intense, increased energy, pleasurable feeling. It may decrease your need for food or sleep. It gives you a very focused attention. If you may have had this happen on a first date, where you were really attracted to somebody, either before or during that first date. Often it's before, and this is one of the first or second date, and you're really, really finding them attractive in one or more ways, and you're just paying super attention to what they're telling you. Every detail is amazing and interesting, and you're paying. This, for many people in couples, is the time when they focus the hardest and closest on what their partner's saying, and it slides away from there thereafter. Kind of interesting. Another chemical is serotonin. This is the one that sort of creates an obsession. Yeah. And there are others. And if we could make a pill that had all of these, that were not destroyed in your stomach, that actually produced this quantitative effect that we could measure and titrate, that'd be amazing. We don't have such a thing. In that set of behaviors and thoughts and feelings, we began that early attraction with a search for similarities, and we start to imagine that we have no differences. We're as if we were one. That's nature wanting us to pair bond and make babies. That's what nature wants. It doesn't matter, what your orientation is. That's nature. Okay. The younger you are, the more likely you are to mistake this for love. And it's not love. It has nothing to do with love. It's sexual attraction. Okay? Now, this sexual attraction, this neurochemical storm, if you will, fades. I say 6 months. Other people say a year. I've heard even people say a year and a half. I think it's probably 6 months to a year, maybe. I put 6 to 8 months in your PowerPoint. To me, that's most reasonable, but I want you to know that's an educated guess on my part. An observational guess. Clinically observed. And that's when the really deeper stuff can happen. That's when you really get to see who your partner is. That's when real love gets a chance to develop. Okay? Now, I have, lastly, a whole bunch of questions that would be very useful for you to ask yourself. Ask yourself before you commit to somebody in a long-term relationship. Before you make babies, before you lend them money, before you move in with them, before you marry them, that kind of stuff. Don't do that until you have a sense of, is this person really good for me? Let me just go over a few, and you can read the rest. One is, do they have and have they had sustained long-term friendships? If they have, that's good. Do they like to socialize? Now, if they like to socialize and you don't, or vice versa, that's going to be an issue later. That's going to be a big issue later. Do they like to travel? If both of you like travel, great. If Neither like travel, great. But if one of you does and one of you doesn't, that's going to be an issue later. And one more time, do you share values? Do you have similar core moral values? Do they have a temper? This is going to be a problem later if they do. Are they kind to animals and children? If they are, good one. Good. Okay. Do you have a similar interest in sex? In other words, in terms of how often you want sex, how you would like to go about having sex, and those sorts of things. Is that similar? Because if there's a wide difference, you're going to have to compromise somehow on that issue, or that's going to become an issue. Or as I like to say, a big issue over a little tissue. Pardon me, I couldn't resist it. Similar sense of humor, or at least a sense of humor. Are they financially responsible? If not, boy, that's going to be a big one. Do they like to talk? Again, this is you fit together in that way, you know? You both like to talk, or it's better if you both like to talk. And then secondary to that, can they form coherent sentences? Because you're going to discover that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and as you move out from there, if this is a life partner, that talking together about many different things and ideas and consider and what if and that becomes really important, really important. Do they have a stable job history? If yes, good. Or do they have at least a set of reasonable reasons why they don't? Are they basically either realistic in nature as they see the world, or are they happy and pleasant? Okay, those are all positives. The negative end would be, are they really pessimistic and downer, and do they suck the life out of a party or a room with what they say and what they think? Okay, that would be a problem potentially for later. Okay, all right. Now, I do have an additive to the PowerPoint that concerns self-disclosure, and I talk about in that section a couple of important things that I will relate to you now. So self-disclosure is the biggest part of intimacy, but so is doing things together, conquering problems and difficult times together, creating your own story as a couple, see, and slowly moving through levels of self-disclosure. Okay? Unsuccessful relationships are characterized by things like infidelity, unwillingness to compromise, not willing to talk, being very young and immature. That's typical. If you found your life partner when you were 18 and you're still with them when you're 30 and everything's fine, more power to you. Boy, you are lucky. Maybe not wise, but more power to you. And then sexual dissatisfaction. Those are the things that often lead to relationship failure. Infidelity, not compromising, not communicating, being very young, and sexual dissatisfaction. Okay. But the biggest mistakes you could make include things like expecting your mate to read your mind. You have to say what you want in any area. You have to say it out loud, carefully, clearly. Playing the martyr. You don't want to be the one that you're the victim and, no. Thinking you're always right. You got to let go of your ego. Got to let go of it. Rescuing your mate. See? So let's give you an example of that. You have a mate who is started to drink, and they're drinking to excess. And you notice it, and they say, I need help. I want you to, listen, I'm so hungover, call in and tell them I can't make it to work. Don't do that. That is a very slippery slope. That's rescuing. That's their job, to handle that situation, because they have to experience the consequences of their behavior, not you, which would be lying on their behalf. What's supporting, which is perfectly fine, okay? Supporting is not rescuing, is helping them find an appropriate AA group to go to. Or maybe an appropriate drug counselor, drug and alcohol counselor. Okay? Another thing that's really, really bad, big mistake, is taking your mate for granted. We need to be sure that our mates know that we appreciate them, whether it's housework or childcare or doing a job they don't like or going to work every day or whatever it is, making dinner, whatever it is, that you really appreciate it. And you're willing to keep the chores and things 50-50 as much as you can. And the last thing that is a big mistake, a really big mistake, is letting passions die, is not having a physical sexual relationship that's rewarding between the two of you. Now, what that means is you have to stay committed to communicating about what each of you wants and needs and exploring how to make that happen. Okay? We're going to talk about that later in the course. In fact, the next subject will cover some of that. Okay? All right. So that's the part 2, and I hope you are doing well, and see you on the return PowerPoint. Bye.